Well, thank you all for joining us for this live update with respect to the fires in Central Newfoundland. First, let me say that I know it's a stressful time to the citizens of Central Newfoundland, and let me tell you that you have the full force of all levels of government across Canada wanting to help navigate through this difficult time. We thought it was appropriate at this point to give an update, given the dynamic, changing situation of the fires and of your personal situations, perhaps. Right now, we've been fortunate that the weather has cooperated, and that means that the wind patterns have been cooperating, and that, frankly, we've got some much-needed rain. We've had 10 millimeters of rain before 8 a.m. this morning, and it's still raining over the fire area as we speak. So that is much-needed precipitation right now. Some more good news in the fact that the winds have not behaved as predicted, and consequently you're not seeing the volume of smoke in Grand Falls-Windsor and Bishop Falls. Yet further good news is the Bay d'Espoir Highway servicing Costa Bays and the Canagra Peninsula is now passable. That may not be passable for long, and we're monitoring it regularly, but right now, given the smoke conditions, it is favorable to pass. RCMP are helping people along the way, and we ask people to take their time when traveling through the smoke. That said, it is still an out-of-control fire. Well, two fires now that are separated, and has grown overnight to an area of 200 square kilometers now. So it is still very active. It still needs to be treated with significant respect because it is not controlled. Anything can change, as we've seen in the last 72 hours, and we are very cognizant that things can change again. We have evacuated patients from Central Health and long-term care facilities, but emergency services remain active in Central Health right now, in Grand Falls-Windsor. We have evacuated everybody that we intend to evacuate now from Central Health in Grand Falls-Windsor, and we are keeping an eye as we move forward. I know there's been a lot of stress and strain with respect to people living in the Costa Bays region with respect to supplies. The Bay d'Espoir Highway opening today, hopefully for an extended period of time, will allow some supplies to be delivered. As I understand it, there is a transport truck en route now. But despite, irrespective of that, we have been providing supplies using helicopter support. We're still actively working on ferry support, perhaps coming this time from the Ramia side. So we are still very much aware of the isolation that has been caused by the fire and its impact on the Bay d'Espoir Highway, and we are continuing to support you and your families during this troubled time. So I will now open it up for questions. Of course, I'm fortunate enough to be joined by Minister Loveless and Minister Hogan today. I'd also like to, before opening it up to questions, really thank the hardworking women and men on the front lines of the fire, and the front lines here in this room today, and other operation centers around the province, people who have helped establish emergency shelters, and our hardworking healthcare workers who have organized a massive transport of patients and continue to look after those who are ambulatory in their own homes in the impacted areas. So with that, I'll turn it over to questions.
Premier, I'm wondering what conditions would you need to see in order to drop the state of emergency?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we continue to follow it very closely, Peter. Right now, it's what the firefighters would describe. They're still in attack mode, so they're really in the acute phase of fighting this fire. And I want to reiterate, the fire path is not currently on a direct route towards Grand Falls-Windsor and Bishop Falls in terms of the flames. But if the smoke, if the wind changes and heads towards Grand Falls-Windsor, the volume of smoke will be just overwhelming for the citizens of that area. So, yeah, conditions are more favorable, but the smoke conditions are still very real. And if the wind shifts, it's too late to start to evacuate people at that point. So we still want people to be very much on a heightened, be on high alert, and we still have the state of emergency in place right now. Hopefully the weather cooperates, the water bombers are able to do their job, the tankers are able to do their job, and we can have a better sense of control of the fire, and they can move from that attack phase into the next phase of containing that fire, and at which point we'd look at relieving the state of emergency.
I guess, you talked a little bit about the rain. You also talked about the highway being open, but, so how would the fire compare right now as to when you called the state of emergency on Saturday now that it has grown at the same time?
Yeah, sure. So it's grown significantly, right? When we did the update on Sunday, it was 100 square kilometers. Now it's 200 square kilometers. So it is not contained. It is not under control. It is still an active fire. And despite the fire, despite the rain from early this morning, last night into today, there's still active fires burning significantly. It's hard to predict where this is going to go. It's a dynamic situation, but I think it's again too late to declare a state of emergency if the wind shifted and there was smoke crippling the people of Grand Falls, Windsor, Bishop Falls, and the surrounding area.
Are there any restrictions on the reopening of the highway? Will it be closing at some time, or is it open 24/7?
At this point, it's we're playing it hour by hour. Really, there are crews on either side of the closed area, and we are just taking it hour by hour to see how the conditions change. You can imagine the wind can change in a second. So if I give you an answer now and the wind changes, then it'll look like we were wrong. That's not true. We're playing it we're playing it as we should be playing it, very responsibly. And in doing so, that doesn't give the answers, the long-term answers often that people want, but it's the only answer we can provide now, is that we're monitoring the situation very closely, and it is open currently, but I can't give any definitive timelines of how long that will remain open.
Premier, you mentioned there that the fire sort of isn't headed towards Grand Falls, Windsor, that smoke is the concern. Does that mean that evacuation from a fire concern isn't there anymore? It's only smoke that you're worried about?
So it was always smoke that we were worried about. We were putting up fire breaks around the perimeter of Grand Falls, Windsor, and Bishop Falls should the path of the fire change. Because just because it's not in the direct path today doesn't mean it won't be tomorrow. What I saw, what we all saw on Saturday, was an incredible volume of smoke. It's hard to describe how much smoke can be created in a 100 square kilometer fire. That was only 20 to 25 kilometers away from Grand Falls, Windsor, and Bishop Falls. That volume of smoke would cripple and potentially harm people within that community. That's why we had to make that call when we did. The path of the fire, if you will, how it's traveling from a fuel perspective, from a burn perspective, does not appear to be en route to Grand Falls, Windsor, but the smoke is just so close. I mean, I was in Gander at Command Center, and I'm sure many people in Central Newfoundland have experienced the impacts of smoke, and Gander was 40 miles away from the edge of the fire. We were still seeing the impact of the smoke in the sky, and you could actually smell it and taste it. People I understand here in St. John's this weekend could smell it. So you can imagine that smoke, it was dissipated and diluted over an area of 40-mile radius, really. But if that shifts and change to 20 kilometers, that would have a significant impact on people at Grand Falls, Windsor, Bishop Falls, and the surrounding area.
Should a evacuation order have to be made at some point?
Yeah.
How fast can that evacuation happen?
Well, this is why we took, I think, the responsible move of evacuating vulnerable people first. So people who were in hospital beds, people who were using the acute care facilities, long-term care homes, because you can't evacuate them in a minute. So if we say go now, it's too late to see, okay, who's taking John in the stretcher, or who's taking Aunt Marg, who can't get out of her house and is in a wheelchair. So this is why we wanted to do this in an orderly fashion. So if we do have to evacuate these communities, number one, the vulnerable people with ambulatory issues, people with health concerns, have already been evacuated. And number two, people have been on high alert now for a couple of days, so they presumably would have a go bag ready and some valuables ready to go if needed.
Minister Loveless, Harbour Breton Deputy Mayor Roy Drake said this morning that one of their big priorities today is fuel shortage. They've been rationing around the communities. Any update on when they can maybe expect fuel supply?
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity. And I've been in constant contact with the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor and all mayors down there. Now that the Base Bear Highway is open, they're aware of that, so that's in the plans right now in terms of the highway, and we're constantly working on that. And but that's certainly, if we can say it's a bright spot today, then the opening of the highway is certainly a bright spot in moving not just fuel but food supplies as well. So they're And just before I came here, Mr. Drake also sent me pictures of food supplies that was landed by a chopper, and the volunteers there doing their job, and seeing that happening where supplies is being distributed throughout the Coast of Bays region. It's great to see, and there's a sense of optimism there, but cautiously optimistic in terms of the highway open and other areas as well.
And I'd say all the municipalities have been incredibly united and strategic in this front. This is once again shows the spirit of Newfoundland and Labrador coming together as communities to help fight a common goal, or help achieve a common goal. And it's been really something to see, and everybody should take some reassurance that everybody is working on the same page, fully aligned, despite the challenges.
And Minister, do you have an update on the ferry that's currently being serviced here in St. John's on when that might be back up and running?
Right, Sound of Valet. I don't have a confirmed time, but right now, unfortunately, I mean, the vessel, just so everybody can appreciate it, there was current work done on it. Trial runs were done, and everything was fine. And unfortunately, there was a mechanical breakdown, and that had to be brought into St. John's. Right now, that's being worked on, and right now, it's probably later part of this week that she would be ready to sail. And but you know, parking that, we're looking at other options as well. So it's not just stopped there at that point. We're looking at other options. Whether, as the Premier mentioned, the Gallipoli that services Ramia. That's also an option as well, and we've communicated with the MHA there as well, and all those involved that that's a possibility. And again, as the Premier mentioned, the communities are pulling together and saying yes to this because they realize that other parts of the province need their help, and so everybody got a common goal is to help each other out, and so that's what we're determined to do, whatever we need to do now that the Sound of Valet is there for mechanical repairs.
Premier, this weekend there was 15 or 16 fires that the St. John's Regional Fire Department had to go to in St. John's, Mount Pearl, and Paradise area alone that were reported. So, do you have any message for folks about taking the fire ban seriously when there's situations happening in central resources are slim in these areas?
Well, yes, please respect the fire ban. I think as one of us said on the weekend, knock it off if you're considering having open pit fire outside the rules. Please pay attention to the rules. We've just lived through a pandemic where we all had to rally together to support each other, to support our neighbors, our families and friends, and that was a collective response to a biological threat. We need a collective response to this weather threat, to this fire threat. And so I plead with people to please respect the fire ban. Look, there'll be plenty of time to enjoy a fire and roast some marshmallows when this is all over. But right now, we need you to please be responsible and respect the hardworking women and men in these fire departments who could be deployed elsewhere at a second's notice.
Question about resources. How long do we have access to the Quebec water bombers? And when it comes to crews on the ground, they haven't been able to get in past days. Has there been any progress in terms of getting them on the ground to help fight the fire there?
Yeah, so as I understand it, there was some progress yesterday with respect to a controlled burn crew, for example. Ignition specialists who were burning off fuel in a proactive measure, trees forced to prevent the fire from fire to fight fire, as you've heard it before. The water bombers are, as I understand it, active this afternoon, or intending to be active this afternoon, and have done just an incredible job of fighting the different edges. Because you can imagine, Peter, as the wind shifts, the edge of the fire shifts. And it's not so much the bombers can get to where the fire is, but can't get to where the smoke is blowing. So depending on the pattern of the wind, they can get to different sections of the fire. And they're doing their best. And one of the reasons it hasn't progressed, like predicted, towards Grand Falls, Windsor, and Bishop Falls, was a solid day of bombing that leading edge while the wind was shifted away from Grand Falls, Windsor, and Bishop Falls. I had the opportunity to see them in action. It's quite remarkable. Down, up, 6 of them, and doing a circuit basically over the leading edge of the fire. Quite spectacular.
How many people have evacuated, both mandatory and voluntarily?
So I believe right now there's 65 evacuated from the long-term care facilities in Central Health region. I believe there's approximately 40 acute care patients have been transferred from Central Health to Eastern Health and 5 to Western Health in terms of the acute care facilities.
And what about the phone lines that have just been put out today? Any idea how those are doing?
Minister Hogan, you might have a better idea of the uptake on those.
Yeah, no, so obviously people can call that number. The Premier has it here. I'm going to steal it from
There you
him.
go.
1-833-845-0775, and that's for people to call into the Provincial Emergency Operations Center with regards to issues for transportation and supplies and things like that. I think people have been hearing the updates throughout the day, and as the Premier said, things have been good today and have progressed very well. We've talked about possible ferry options. The highway's open, which is going to allow trucks to get down the Bay d'Espoir Highway, and obviously also going to allow people on the peninsula to leave themselves if they want to go up to the bigger centers to get some supplies. And we do have a lot of air assets. I think about half dozen air assets coming in and out of the peninsula throughout the day, picking up supplies and goods in various areas, including St. John's and Grand Falls. So I think the people on the peninsula should be happy to hear that information. There's lots of work going, lots of transportation issues available, options available to them, and we're working on that very, very hard. I expect the number will start ringing a little bit more if those issues become larger over the next day or so.
Premier, with the rain that we're having today, with the highway opening, can people in the area relax a bit?
Look, we still want them to be very ready. Today is a positive day. It's an optimistic day, but as I said from the beginning, we're still in the first phase of a gigantic fire, 200 square kilometers. So people need to still have a heightened sense of readiness. So not panicked, but ready should the conditions change. I mean, we all live in Newfoundland and Labrador. We know that the weather can change in a heartbeat. So as best we want people to be ready, but not panicked. And I think that's the tone we're trying to establish. I can understand and appreciate people in Grand Falls-Windsor and Bishop Falls may look out today and say, well, the air is not that bad here, but the fire is only 25 kilometers away. And if that volume of smoke turns, as we know the winds can change in Newfoundland and Labrador, then we don't want people caught short. So we really want them to be ready.
Are there any plans to maybe provide a little extra support for people who are feeling stressed out, maybe a warm line of sorts?
Right now, if people are stressed or anxious, we encourage them to use the 811 number, especially if they have other medical problems that could be contributing to their anxiety or stress levels. But of course, 811 has a link to mental health supports should they be required. Great. Well, thanks everybody. And again, I just wanted to stress, to pick up on Peter's point before we conclude, that we are, even though it's a positive day, it's an optimistic day, we're not out of the woods yet, and this fire is still very active. So even though you may be feeling a sense of security because you can't see it in your community, please don't be panicked, but be ready should an evacuation be required. Thank you.